There's a specific type of person you've probably met at some point in your life. They're not necessarily the hardest worker in the room. They're not always the most talented, but somehow, within a year or two, they've completely transformed into new skills, a new mindset, and new results. And you're left wondering what exactly happened because you were working just as hard. Maybe harder. So what did they figure out that you didn't? The answer is not what most people expect. It's not discipline. It's not a morning routine. It's not even intelligence. It comes down to something far more fundamental, something operating underneath all of those surface-level behaviors that most people never think to examine. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. It changes how you understand growth entirely. Before we get into the 3 things fast growers do differently, I want you to think about someone in your own life. Someone who seems to level up faster than everyone around them. Hold that person in your mind. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why they move at a different speed. And more importantly, you're going to understand how to replicate it. Let's start with the concept of identity architecture. Your identity is not a fixed thing. Most people treat it as if who they are is already determined, like their personality and their limits are baked in from childhood, genetics, or circumstance. But psychologically speaking, identity is actually a dynamic structure. It's constantly being reinforced or quietly reshaped based on the experiences you have, the beliefs you hold, and the stories you keep telling yourself. Fast growers understand this on an almost instinctive level. They treat their identity not as a description of who they are, but as a design for who they're becoming. Here's why this matters practically. When most people try to grow, they start with behavior. They try to act differently before they believe differently. So the change feels forced, uncomfortable, and exhausting, and eventually they revert back to whatever felt natural. But fast growers reverse the sequence. They start at the identity level. They ask not what they need to do, but who they need to become. And that shift in starting point changes everything that follows. The first thing fast growers do differently is that they deliberately rewrite their internal narrative before external evidence shows up. This sounds abstract, so let me make it concrete. Imagine you want to become someone who takes bold action consistently. The slow approach, the approach most people take, is waiting to feel confident before acting, waiting for proof that you can do it. But that proof never comes because the action never happens first. Fast growers flip this. They begin narrating their identity as if the change has already started. Not in a delusional, detached from reality way, but in a directional way. They say this is who I'm becoming, and then they look for daily evidence that supports that story. Neuroscience actually backs this up. The brain has a built-in mechanism called the reticular activating system, essentially a filter for what you notice in the world. When you define an identity clearly, your brain begins selectively surfacing information and opportunities that confirm it. You literally start seeing things you were blind to before. The second thing fast growers do differently is that they actively seek friction rather than avoiding it. Now, this sounds like generic motivational advice, so let me be more specific. There's a difference between discomfort that breaks you down and discomfort that builds you. Most people run from both. Fast growers have developed the ability to distinguish between the two, and they deliberately engineer situations where productive friction is guaranteed. They take on projects slightly above their current ability. They put themselves in rooms where they are genuinely the least experienced person. They ask for feedback, knowing it will be uncomfortable to hear. Every one of these choices is a calculated exposure to a growth edge. And over time, that tolerance for friction compounds. What was once terrifying becomes familiar. What was familiar becomes easy. And the cycle continues accelerating. Here's the psychological mechanism underneath this. It's called desensitization through repeated exposure. When your nervous system encounters something threatening or challenging, the initial response is resistance and stress. But repeated exposure to the same stimulus gradually reduces that stress response. Fast growers have essentially trained their nervous systems to experience growth as normal rather than threatening. They've lowered the biological cost of expanding their comfort zone. And because that cost is lower for them, they can sustain the process far longer than most people can. The third thing, and this is the one most people completely miss, is that fast growers ruthlessly curate their proximity. And I don't just mean the people they spend time with, although that matters enormously. I mean the voices they allow into their head on a daily basis, the content they consume, the conversations they prioritize, the environments they place themselves in. They treat proximity as a lever, not a passive thing that happens to them. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Your baseline sense of what's normal, what's possible, and what's expected is largely set by the people and environments closest to you. If your daily environment signals that average is acceptable, your nervous system will calibrate to average. But if your environment constantly exposes you to people operating at a higher level, your baseline quietly rises to meet it. Fast growers engineer this deliberately. They are almost obsessively intentional about the signal they're allowing into their lives. Now let's bring these three things together because, in isolation, they're interesting. But together, they create something much more powerful. When you rewrite your internal narrative, you change what you notice and what you believe is available to you. When you seek productive friction, you build real evidence that the new identity is true. And when you curate your proximity intentionally, you sustain an environment that constantly reinforces both of the other two. These three elements form a feedback loop. Each one amplifies the others. And once that loop gets momentum, growth stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like direction, like you're being pulled forward rather than pushing yourself. This is why fast growers don't necessarily work harder. They've aligned their identity, their behavior, and their environment into a single coherent system. And that alignment is doing enormous amounts of work that discipline alone can never replicate. So, what does this mean for you right now? Here's the honest answer. Most people who watch videos like this walk away feeling temporarily inspired, and then nothing changes. And the reason nothing changes is not a lack of motivation. It's that the identity underneath the motivation hasn't shifted. You can want growth desperately and still be unknowingly defending the old version of yourself at every turn. The question worth sitting with after this video is simple but uncomfortable. What identity are you currently living from? And does it actually match the person you say you want to become? If there's a gap there, and there almost always is, that gap is the work, not the tactics, not the productivity hacks. The gap between who you're currently being and who you need to become to create what you actually want. Growth isn't a mystery, it's a system. And now you can see the system. The question is whether you're willing to start designing it intentionally instead of just hoping it happens to you. If you found this perspective helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe for more insights on intentional growth. It really helps the channel grow, and we've got a lot more coming.